Ladies and gentlemen, good evening from Bismarck, North Dakota. We are almost international. I typically broadcast to you all from the last home of the Confederacy in Danville, Virginia, and now I have gone to the extreme northern wilds where General Pope and others chased the Lakota Sioux out in the Minnesota Uprising of 1862. A program on Custer's tomorrow morning from Fort Abraham Lincoln, work our way over to Billings, Montana, and then we'll drop down. We'll do the Battle of the Rosebud and the Little Bighorn, and then we're heading on over towards the Black Hills of South Dakota. We'll do Deadwood, Mount Rushmore, Devil's Hill, and Crazy Horse Monument, and finish up visiting Sitting Bull's a grave site before we end up back in Bismarck on the 28th of June. So I was delighted to have this break and this opportunity to welcome you to the 21st of our interviews that we started way back in January. And we are rapidly completing the rest of the 2021 schedule. Tom, I'm having Darryl Smith for us at the end of August. It will be his first program with Blue and Gray. He's basically going to do the Civil War along the Ohio in northern Kentucky and in Cincinnati, and that's what we'll be talking about tonight. As for the programs and so forth, what we're seeing back out in the field right now is certainly everything is loosening up quite a bit. I don't see any masks at all out here in North Dakota, and we're finding everybody on this tour. As a matter of fact, everybody on our first 4 programs since we started again back in April, everybody has been immunized. And if you are immunized, that is certainly the short path to a relatively uninterrupted program. We shed our masks, and we're doing fairly well, and we keep an eye on the groups around us and stuff. So the programs have gone very well so far without any problems. Probably the biggest inconvenience people experience are that we very briefly, while they're having breakfast or something, we just take their temperature before they get going. If you're running a temperature, you can't go, but we haven't had any problems with that either. So everything seems to be moving fairly well. And as we go into our summer months, we've got this program's going on next week. We are also doing Straits Raid in Alabama with Brian Wills and Norm Dazinger, and then we roll into July, and we've got the first day at Gettysburg with Scott Hartwig, and immediately after that we have the retreat from Gettysburg with General Parker Hills and Major General Bill Turpeluk, and then after that we're doing a weekend with Dennis Fry around Harper's Ferry, and then we roll into August, of which Darryl's program comes up at the end of August, but we're also doing in the month, we're doing Tullahoma with Jim Ogden, and we're doing, for the very first time ever, Grierson's Raid from Jackson, Mississippi with Tim Smith, which complements the book he came out with. So lots and lots going on. I hope these interviews give you all enough information that you learn something new about the subjects, which is certainly our primary purpose, and also that you get to know the historian well enough that you might be curious and may want to join us on his program. And in Darryl's case, it is at the end of August, and we'll be based out of Cincinnati, and I'll have a registration form up within about a week or so. So good looking at time. It'd be 3 days and an opening evening, and we finish about half day on a Sunday. So good program to go, and I think that you all will enjoy that. Most all of you are veterans of these Zoom conferences. we've gotten a lot of experience in the last 21 weeks and 21 interviews. And so we have reached a point where we do take direct questions from the audience at the end of the program. Typically, we open in about 20 minutes of 9. We will let you know that this is the last question before we open it up for Q&A. To be frank, you folks have been very attentive. You stay on, you listen to everything that's going on. I don't see a whole lot of audience participation. I think you're probably just taking stuff in. And so if you have a question, I want you to ask it. By all means, there are no dumb questions. But on the other hand, if we get to that point in the program and there are no questions from the audience, then what I will do is just continue on with some additional questions that I have that I didn't want to necessarily dominate the entire hour. But after I've given you all an opportunity to participate, if we haven't filled out the rest of the hour, then I will use these questions to probe Darryl's thoughts a little bit more. And with that, we'll finish right at 9 o'clock as we always do, maybe a few minutes before. Certainly no more than 3-4 minutes after 9. So if you can hang in with us that long, we certainly appreciate it, and we appreciate having you here, and hope that you all find this productive. I also want to thank you for being responsive. This was a very short notice. I knew we were going to do this. Darryl and I were working together on a time that we might be able to do this, and it's just so that Darryl's work schedule happens to not be friendly to the times that we've typically done these programs during the weekdays. And so we looked back and forth as to what might work and so forth. And this Sunday evening became a target of opportunity for us. And so about 2 weeks ago, I asked Darryl if he would go ahead and do a Sunday night, and he was gracious enough to agree to come on with us this evening. So I think with that, this certainly is one of the most unique programs that we have. And with that, I do hope that if you find anything of interest here, we hope we'll see you out there. There is lots going on. If you have, I see some new folks on the attendee roster and stuff. We have all of these interviews on YouTube, and you are certainly invited to join that. The YouTube channel is free, which is up there. You see we have 193 subscribers now, who will take us to 200, and you can just look and you can see lots of views and stuff in there. Gordon Ray's has already had over 1,000 views, and Grierson's 280 and so forth. And so there's a lot of neat things there, and this will be added to that list as well. And we invite you to look at that often and tell your friends and send them there. If you also are looking for more of this stuff, and we realize that a lot of people are housebound and not doing active tours and stuff anymore, we're in the process of putting up over 350 lectures that go back all the way to 1994 that have been done for the Blue and Gray, and that's available on our website, and it's available to people. Karen is showing you that there, the video archives. That's available to anybody who's an active member of the Blue and Gray, and that costs about $75 a year, which is tax deductible, and that gives you unlimited access to lectures from all sorts of folks. We have a 74-year-old Ed Bars talking about Jeb Stuart's ride and other things like that. So it's a lot of really fascinating and good stuff there. You have the free side on the YouTube, and then we're not actually charging you for this, but in respecting people's intellectual property rights, we put all the lectures that we've done over the past 20 some odd years, we put them behind a screen and label them as a project of the organization. So that respects the historians' copyrights and so forth there. But those are open for you to see if you're a member of the organization. We strongly encourage you to give it a look and give it a try. So, okay, Darryl, I'd like to welcome you to Blue and Gray. I also would be remiss if I didn't note that you're a proud member, a renewed member of the Blue and Gray, and I deeply appreciate that. I've found that in more than 30 years of engaging with the Civil War and various sectional historians, I'm pleased every time I meet a new historian, and you've built quite a good reputation in and around Northern Kentucky. What I'd like to open this up with is just to invite you to tell us about your Civil War world and how did you get involved and what most excites you about the study and presentation of the Civil War?
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody that's on. I see some, I recognize some faces out there. So thank you so much for everybody having on. And Len, thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited. I'm glad we were able to work out a schedule that kind of finally met, even though you're in North Dakota. And but I really appreciate it. So, and I appreciate the opportunity to bring people into greater Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky during the Civil War, because the impact of the war in the city, which we'll get to in a little bit, is often overlooked, but is still extremely important. For me, the Civil War has been in my blood probably since I was 8 or 9 years old. My grandparents on a vacation, of course, decades ago now, had stopped at Gettysburg, picked up their young grandson a book called They Met at Gettysburg by Edward Stackpole. And I wore that book out. I mean, I was taking that thing to school. I was very bored in school oftentimes, tracing maps, redrawing maps. I mean, just doing all kinds of things. So I've always been interested in America's military history. Growing up on a farm in the county just north of Cincinnati, we didn't take a lot of vacations, but we'd take some Saturday day trips to various historical sites. Unfortunately, Ohio doesn't have a whole lot of Civil War sites. But the military history of the what I would call the Miami campaign of 1790, 1795, that has always stoked my interest. St. Clair, Harmar, Anthony Lang. And so that's just permeated into this love and passion for really American military history. I'll dabble in World War I and World War II a little bit, but Civil War is probably my true love. And what brings me to it, well, first of all, it's, you can ask the question, right? The simple question of what's the root cause of the war, and you're going to get 800 different answers. That alone will get you. That alone will get you interested in the Civil War, because there's, well, you could say there's no right or wrong answer to that question, but there's just all these millions and millions of stories that are out there, and I have become more and more interested in the first person account, really over the last couple decades. And started looking into my own ancestry into the Civil War, and have some direct ancestors and some indirect ancestors that fought during the Civil War, including a third great uncle that was wounded on September 20th at a little place called Chickamauga in 1863. Wow. So that's so the connections continue then to pull me even stronger into the war, and into studying the war. And so, I just really enjoy sharing those stories. I share Civil War stories with my team at work. Most of my team is greater Cincinnati type folks. We have some folks that work outside of the state. But when I tell them about, oh, did you know about this cemetery that holds a Medal of Honor winner? And they're like, what? I mean, so I get to share that, and that passion just really kind of fuels that even more. Sure. So I really enjoy, getting the people together. And I also like the obscure stuff. And I would say Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, and then, part of the tour going down to Cynthiana as well as Augusta, Kentucky, really obscure stuff that most people do not know about.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'd agree completely. I spend a fair amount of time looking over programs that are offered across the country and so forth. And we a long time ago claimed and staked claim to the West because so many of the people who were actually in the tour business, we of course are in the education business, but those people who are in the tour business all went to deep water ports like Gettysburg and Virginia and things like that. And so predominance of programs ever offered are always in the East. And so I submit that it's really rare to see programs like the Civil War along the Ohio being offered, and it intrigued me. As you know, you and I have played footsie about this for maybe 20 months or so before we finally agreed that we ought to do something, and then COVID got in the way. But I'm delighted that we've done this. So tell us about Civil War era Ohio. Just give us the Cliff Notes version of what makes Ohio significant in the Civil War.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, you have leadership, right? So we can talk about Grant and Sherman and Salmon Chase and Stanton and all those guys, right, that drive the war to its conclusion. You can also talk about Ohio being the state that provided the third most troops in the Civil War after New York and Pennsylvania. You can talk about its impact and influence in terms of manufacturing, transportation. Of course, you got the river. There were canals that crossed across Ohio. Those weren't as impactful by 1861, but a pretty extensive rail network, manufactured goods that are being sent to the South, imported goods coming back up from places like New Orleans. So it is, Civil War Ohio is just, to me, it is that kind of like that heart. And it's trite to say when you're in Ohio and the state of Ohio looks like the shape of a heart anyway. But to me, it's kind of the heart of the Civil War. You've got Buckeyes going east, west, trans-Mississippi, and they're all over the place, which has actually become a running joke with me and several of my friends about, well, you can't take a step on a Civil War battlefield without stepping on some stupid Buckeye. So the impact just from that is incredible. Cincinnati, during that time, and was an extremely important manufacturing hub. I don't want to get too far ahead yet, but Cleveland wasn't as large, of course, as it is today, but Cincinnati was the Queen City of the West. I think some guy named Longfellow might have named it that. So you have this massive impact of Ohioans just going all over the place. Of course, it's connected directly to Virginia, which wasn't West Virginia by that point, and then Kentucky. So it's bordering two slave states as well, which of course plays into Ohio's development. There were all kinds of issues going on in Ohio prior to the Civil War in the antebellum period. Cincinnati had several race riots prior to the Civil War, where a vast majority of the African-American population left Cincinnati. Went from basically down to 1/10 of its original number by 1850. And so there's a variety of reasons why Ohio has this different type of impact. It's got connections to the South, right, in terms of trade. It has connections to the East in terms of settling. So it's really kind of a mix. It doesn't have as strong of a secession type feel as, say, Southern Illinois, for example. But there is still a lot of Copperheadism that goes on in the state during the war, prior to the war, even after the war, that just really makes Ohio kind of a key. Now, again, you're hearing pride come out a little bit, which is, I guess, okay. But it is the impact that it has on the Civil War as a whole. You take away Ohio units out of every battle, you'd be surprised the number of units that you would be missing from any battle, East or West.
The thing that strikes me, and it always takes the thing, when you have a real wide body and general knowledge of a lot of things, there are things that trigger your memory and your ability to relate to certain things. And the thing that I always have noted is that the names like Cincinnati are always popping up. That's, the Western commanders, the folks who get sent west seem to emanate in and from and around Cincinnati, and then headquarters is there, and operations into Kentucky and into Tennessee and so forth seem to have a brain that is located in and around Cincinnati. The first day of your tour is in and around Cincinnati. Tell us, from your perspective, what is significant about Cincinnati during the Civil War, and what's there to see there?
Sure. There is still even though Cincinnati doesn't have a great reputation for preservation of historic buildings, there are still numerous sites to see in Cincinnati. But I'll backtrack a little bit. You made the comment about Cincinnati being the brand, and that's very true. Of course, McClellan starts here, right? Rosecrans starts here.
Yeah.
Lew Wallace is impactful here. Of course, Grant grows up an hour east of the city. Hooker will be buried here because he meets a Cincinnati woman and settles down here after the war, and he's buried here in Cincinnati. So it's the seventh largest city in the United States. Depending on what source, you'll see 6, 7, or 8. People will discount Brooklyn. Brooklyn was its own separate entity during the Civil War, so Brooklyn's actually larger than Cincinnati. But it's the seventh largest city in the United States. On this side of the mountains, only New Orleans, which I don't know if you call that this side of the mountains or not, only New Orleans was larger. Major manufacturing hub, the third largest manufacturing hub after Philadelphia and New York City, I believe. So you're producing goods, you're producing war materials, wagons. I mean, just anything and everything's being produced in Cincinnati. We will, on the tour, we're going to start at Spring Grove. Spring Grove Cemetery is an iconic, beautiful location. It's an arboretum. It was designed by a gentleman by the name of Adolf Strauch. It is just absolutely gorgeous. There are over 5,000 Union veterans buried in Spring Grove Cemetery, second largest cemetery in the United States. There are 40 Union generals buried there. There are 20 plus colonels buried there, including one Confederate. I don't think a lot of people know about. There are Confederate soldiers that are buried there because they were captured prisoners of war, wounded at places like Shiloh. They had gone to Camp Dennison, which is outside of the city, and then passed away because of whatever reason. And they were initially buried at Camp Dennison and then reinterred to Spring Grove Cemetery. There's Memorial Hall that's down in what we call the Over the Rhine area. The Over the Rhine area at its peak had 75,000 Germans in it at one point, and something along the lines of 50 breweries. So it's Cincinnati, it's still amazing. We will see in northern Kentucky side, we'll see some of the battery defenses that were put up in 1862 when good old Henry Heath was bringing a Confederate force north to threaten the Queen City in September of 1862 as part of the heartland of the Perryville campaign. We will stop and see, hopefully if we have time, we'll stop and see the Black Brigade Monument that's downtown right along the river, which that's a whole nother story that we can get into. Of course, we will get into on the tour, and just about the African-American experience that was going on here. So you've got personalities, people, manufacturing, its location on the river, directly across from Kentucky, railroad. So there's a lot going on here in the Queen City. And like I said, unfortunately, a lot of areas are, a lot of buildings have been torn down. You can't visit some of the headquarters, like the original headquarters site that was used several times. The Burnett House is long gone. They call that progress, I guess, but we don't do a great job about preserving some of our history in Cincinnati. But we'll see some of the sites that are extant that I think are pretty important. And we'll really delve into Cincinnati while we're wandering around Spring Grove Cemetery.
What's fascinating to me, of course, my dad is from Cincinnati and he grew up over on the west side in Cheviot, but they're of German descent, Rydell. But what really fascinates me among the many things that go on there is, and I think you lead into it, and because of how the country has subsequently evolved post-war, Cincinnati is a big city, it's a big metropolitan area, but an appreciation of how large Cincinnati was in 1860 is something that I didn't fully appreciate and others didn't appreciate. But if you look at the post-war Cincinnati and you see it continues to build off of this large populous base, you have these mega old corporations like Procter & Gamble and General Electric and so forth that all get their bases and their headquarters out of Cincinnati. And then even more interestingly, I think for American folklore and history is the first professional baseball club in what will subsequently be the Major League Baseball is in Cincinnati, and it is the Cincinnati Redlegs. And those Redlegs, of course, have a very specific Civil War connotation because Redlegs were loyalists who operated in the guerrilla wars and so forth. And so with a new ball club starting just 5 or 6 years after the end of the Civil War, because you remember they were playing baseball during the Civil War, the armies and so forth are playing that. It's just interesting to see that evolution and so forth as it comes. So, I want to ask one more question before we move on to other things. Because we're going to be up in Cincinnati area for 3 days, we're going to be there a Thursday night, Friday, Saturday, and then we finish midday on Sunday. If people were to want to spend an extra day, arrive early on Thursday or stay in the area on Sunday afternoon and stuff, where would you send them that we're not planning to visit? Where would their time be best spent in the Cincinnati area?
Absolutely. Well, I think, of course, we have the National Underground Railroad Museum here, and it's right on the river. I would highly consider a visit there. It may move you, which I hope it would. Of course, I alluded to it already. We've got this guy named Hiram Ulysses Grant that it's born and grows up about an hour east of the city. The childhood home or the birthplace is right along the river in a little village called Point Pleasant. And then where he grew up and where he attended school, his early schooling is in Georgetown, Ohio. Those are worth it. They're both within Claremont County. That county also has a large underground railroad self-driving tour, if anybody's interested in doing something along those lines, just to really get a feel about the abolitionist movement that was really, really strong in Claremont County, which is the county just east of Cincinnati. Memorial Hall, I alluded to already, has artifacts in there from the 9th Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment, which is pretty cool. Right across the street is Washington Park with its busts of McCook and Heckler, that being Robert McCook, who was killed, murdered, or whatever term you want to use. He had been the colonel of the 9th Ohio. And all the veterans poured out after the war when his monument went up. There's Camp Dennison, which is 16 miles northeast of the city along the Little Miami River. There's not a lot there to see. There is a very small park that has a monument, but the John Hunt Morgan Heritage Trail runs through that area as well. And there are some interpretive signs within a mile at that location. One can follow the John Hunt Morgan Heritage Trail across the county if they so desired. That was a pretty incredible feat. He will go around Cincinnati and be on the other side of Cincinnati within just a day or day and a half of travel without getting really. There's one little skirmish that's close to Camp Dennison, but really without getting caught, he will circumnavigate the big city of Cincinnati. So there's just a few of the places that one can go.
Yeah, I think that we did an Ohio program with Steve Wise a couple of years ago, and there's just so much to do. And I concur. I think the Underground Railroad trails over towards Ripley and so forth are really remarkable. There are safe houses and things like that. The Underground Railroad Museum is really encompassing. So I would agree with that. I think you've got some really, really neat places there if people want to spend the time doing that. We're along the Ohio River. We've talked about Ohio, but we've also need to talk about Kentucky, and Kentucky's important. It's the setting for so much of the war, and we've taken tours to a lot of spots within the state, and we'll do a lot more in the future. Kentucky's a border state. Do you really view it as such? And if you do, why? And if you don't, why?
Well, of course, the traditional view is it's a border state because it's a slave state, and it borders against a free state. So if you take that hard description, you would say, okay, it's a border state. However, Kentucky is filled with Unionists. They may be pro-slavery, but they are pro-union probably more than pro-slavery. And, so that's kind of my view with Kentucky. It is a confused and convoluted situation in Kentucky. Lincoln makes the comment about losing Kentucky is the same as lose the whole game, because if you lose Kentucky, then Maryland goes and Missouri goes, et cetera. And he's right. When Kentucky, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but when Kentucky stays neutral, this is a massive buffer zone for the Confederacy. They really don't have to worry about that Tennessee-Kentucky border. They can focus on the Mississippi, trans-Mississippi, or they can send Western troops over to the Eastern Theater. You've got this 300 or 400 mile long buffer that you don't even have to worry about because of Kentucky's air quotes neutrality during this particular point. It changes, of course, throughout the course of the war. You get interesting personalities like Stephen Gano Burbridge, or Butcher Burbridge, or Bloody Burbridge, or whatever term you'd like to call him. We'll run back into him on the tour when we're in Cynthiana, because he's involved at the Second Battle of Cynthiana. The making courthouse lawns run red, and then of course the Emancipation Proclamation comes out. That confuses Kentuckians even more, or conflicts Kentuckians even more. You have a slew of Union officers that will resign because of the Emancipation Proclamation, because they feel that Lincoln has lied to them, broken his promises to that state. So it is, Kentucky is, I just love it. I can be to almost any battlefield site within just a few hours in Kentucky. And so that's probably why I enjoy, of course, doing a lot of Kentucky type tours. But their stories, you could just stretch what you do in Cincinnati and just continue to tell even more interesting stories. You do have some brother against brother type situations. It's more like cousin against cousin and uncle against nephew type situations in Kentucky. But it is a plethora of personalities and places to go see. It is. If it had gone Confederate, personal view, if it had gone Confederate, then you have a real issue for the Midwest. You have a massive issue for Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. And Southern Indiana and Southern Illinois, I've already alluded to a little bit, are pretty heavy secessionist people, or Southern leaning type people in the first place. You're going to have some real issues defending the Ohio River, even with the North's manufacturing capabilities. And they put together a brown water fleet pretty quickly. You're still going to have some massive issues defending that line. And I think that comes to play when you see, Morgan crossing the Ohio River near Indiana in 1863. And there's other raids that come across the Ohio River. And that's with Kentucky being, at that point, a pro-Union state. So again, depends on your definition of border. But I think if Kentucky becomes a Confederate state, there are going to be issues. So I guess I just talked myself into saying, yes, it's a border state. So.
Okay. Well, I think the other thing that is endlessly fascinating to me is what are the politics that actually prevent states like Maryland or Kentucky from actually making the plunge and going with their slaveholding brethren to the South. I mean, Virginia's decision is clearly made in the choice between sending troops to the Union Army to put down their sister states, whereas in Kentucky doesn't take such a principled stand. They basically say, do we really have to be bothered with this? In effect, we don't want to take sides. We just leave us alone, stay out of here, don't force us one way or the other. And I guess that intrigues me because at least I understand it in Maryland. Maryland has got the national capital that it's been carved out of their territory, and there's an Eastern Maryland and there's a Western Maryland. But when I look at Kentucky, I still find myself confounded as to how they could get up and say, I don't want to play, leave us alone. And I wonder, was that really what they felt, or was it something that the state truly was so cleaved politically and ideologically that to take a position either strongly pro-union or pro-secession might create too much turbulence within the state itself. I'm just wondering what you might have thought about something like that.
Well, absolutely. I think, again, I've already used the term conflicted for Kentucky, and it is definitely conflicted. You have a pro-Southern governor, Bariah McGoffin. Later in the summer, they will vote in a mostly pro-union legislature in August of 1861. But I think the root cause for the reason why they won't join the Confederacy is simply economics. The vast majority of a large percentage of their goods are going north. They have such a strong tie to Cincinnati, for example. Louisville has such a strong tie to Indiana. Western places like Owensville or Paducah has such a strong tie to Illinois. But you have all these goods that are going north. They're following the rivers north, they're following the rail lines north, and they're being traded, sold, exchanged in northern states. So while Kentucky's heritage is mostly Virginian with some North Carolinian in there, along the Ohio River, it's a little bit of a mix of both of those, along with Pennsylvanians and whatnot as they come down out of Pittsburgh. But it's economics. It's like, we have it good. Old Abe Lincoln's saying, I'm not going to mess with your slaves. And again, there's a slaveholding population, obviously, in Kentucky. It is a major slave trading state immediately prior to the war and during the neutrality phase, because of the laws that had already been passed about we can't bring in new slaves from overseas, et cetera. So it's a major slave trading state, but that leads to money. And, I'm not going to upset that balance because old Abe Lincoln's not telling me I got to stop doing that. And I can continue to have my economic ties with the North, so I don't have to upset that balance of power. So I think it just comes down to the pocketbook, which is, I guess, unfortunately fortunately true in a lot of situations. It comes down to money. Braxton Bragg will have that issue when he comes in to the state. Of course, he's drugged into the state, I think, by Kirby Smith, but he comes into that state and he makes the comment of something along the lines of the Kentuckians are just too fat. They're rich on their bluegrass and their bluegrass horses. They have no need to join the Confederacy. Although, again, obviously there are tons of Kentucky troops that do, but to the average person who may not be a slaveholder, the Union's been good to me. There's economic reasons not to join. I don't need to upset the status quo. I'll just maintain things as they are. And I think Bariah McGoffin, again, the governor, he's thinking, I could declare and try to push us into Confederacy, but I get the feeling that's not going to happen. Eastern Kentucky is strongly pro-Union. And so I think he just realizes it's not going to happen. And so they hold true. They hold neutral. And again, air quotes around neutral.
I understand. I see that you're going to devote a day to the rise and fall of John Hunt Morgan. I think certainly he's one of the most dynamic of the Confederate cavalry officers. What is it about Morgan that catches and holds your interest?
Well, I've got a couple friends on here. They know how I feel about Morgan. I like to use John Morgan as kind of the example of, we put these guys on these pedestals, right? We create these monuments and we put them on these pedestals, and we just think they're perfect and they're awesome without remembering that we're all human and we're all flawed, right? We all have flaws. I think good Civil War commanders were able to overcome their flaws and to maintain. Grant is a great example of that. He's dogged. I don't put Grant on a big pedestal, but he's determined and he learns from mistakes and he continues to grow as commander. Morgan, I like to use him as one of my examples of, we do this idol worship thing that we probably need to take a step back and go, what really did he accomplish? What was really his positive traits? What were his negative traits? And doing this tour in Cynthiana, and we're going to talk about the first Kentucky raid for the first half of the day, which will lead to the first Battle of Cynthiana. Then we're going to talk about the last Kentucky raid, which leads to the second Battle of Cynthiana. That'll be in the afternoon on that particular day. The first Kentucky raid is a pretty good example of Morgan at his peak. He is raiding. He is sowing confusion, and we'll talk about all those things on the tour, of course. He's using electronic warfare, which not a lot of people know about that. He's got advance parties all over the place. He is sending out parties to create more confusion. They're spreading rumors and lies. He is raiding. He is moving. He is being active. He has under his command, he's got 2 subordinates that really bring in tactics and discipline into his command. His brother-in-law, Basil Duke, is one of them. And so that raid really is very successful. They do something like 1,000 miles in 24 days. Hit different spots. They raise another company or two to their very small brigade, and really successful. Hit and run, keep moving. The battle, should he have fought that battle there? Probably not. But Cynthiana is a pro-Southern town. He knows what the forces are in front of him, which are mostly home guard. So he knows, and he also outnumbers them 2-1. So he's pretty confident at that particular point that he could, scoop up this force and move on, which is exactly what he does. The Union reaction is very slow. It is very slow, very non-committal. So he makes a very good raid in 1862. And I think 1862 is his peak year. I don't believe 1863. I think the Great Raid is a waste of 2,500 cavalrymen. Personal opinion. In 1864, he no longer has his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law is still in a Yankee prison. He loses the other half of his tactical and discipline side. There's an Englishman by the last name of Grenfell that's with him. Brings yes, exactly. That brings all this discipline and ideas as well to the command. He's no longer with the command, and the command has been shattered in Ohio in the 1863 raid. So he has a core group, a very small core group that's the remnants that were able to get out of Ohio. And then he has all these, what I call ne'er-do-wells in 1864. They rob banks. There's various things that happen. And then he gets stubborn, I think, at Cynthiana, where he will decide he's going to stay and fight a battle when he really should not have stayed and fought a battle. And so I think U-62 is this really kind of high point. In 1864, this is like, okay, this is night and day, right? This is humans being flawed. And so I like using Morgan for that reason, because I think, again, we have a tendency to put people up on pedestals that we need to remember some of their foibles along the way. And Morgan's a great example of that to me.
Thanks. I'm a mischief maker, and I shouldn't ought to be, but I can't help but to take the opportunity to ask someone who's a specialist in the area to ask your opinion about the myth and the reality of Uncle Tom's Cabin and the Underground Railroad sites that are in both Ohio and Kentucky.
Well, I'm not sure what you're driving to when you say myth and reality of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Of course, Harriet Beecher Stowe was here prior to the Civil War and prior to moving back to the Northeast and writing Uncle Tom's Cabin. And there are several examples within the book that have been alluded to of things that she did see along the river, personal examples, or she was getting these stories from various places. Seeing a slave auction down in the greater Maysville, Kentucky area, for example. Was she the little woman that started the Civil War? Again, that goes back to that whole, what's the cause of the Civil War? You could say, well, maybe you could point to that a little bit. The reality is those things, I believe, they're happening, right? There are slave auctions. There are these stories that are permeating, that are coming across. There are enslaved people that are coming across the Ohio River prior to the Civil War. They're telling their stories. You've got this huge underground railroad train, figurative train, particularly again through like Claremont County. You mentioned Ripley with 2 very important conductors there along the railroad, Rankin as well as John Parker. John Parker had been a slave and worked his way out of slavery. And so you have all those stories that are being kind of rolled up and wrapped up into one. She sees a lot of this herself. She has friends. She spends time in Maysville, Kentucky. So she does see a lot of this herself. It's a great read. right? I mean, it's a great read. So I want to ask you, what do you mean by the myth of Uncle Tom's Cabin?
Well, some people write great works of fiction for the purposes of moving the social needle in certain areas. I mean, you can't help but, if you look at Gone with the Wind, for example, you can see the very strong influence on Margaret Mitchell in Atlanta at the time she's writing. All the Southern veterans and Union veterans, for that matter, are all in their later years, and there is a widespread sentimentality for each of the causes and so forth that are there. When you look at, I think when you look at Uncle Tom's Cabin, certainly there is much of to trouble people then and now, and it certainly did rile people then, and I think it probably put a burr under the butt of people who were probably pretty influential politically, and it brought the harshness, Simon Legree in relation to Uncle Tom, which then set the standard for the widespread belief that all slavery was extremely harsh. Not making a moral judgment at this point, one way or the other on that, or agreeing or disagreeing. I'm just saying that in writing a book in the 1850s, in something that was so socially contentious, that it certainly was it was intended to move the public conscience and the world conscience, and it indeed did that. And so I was probing to see how you felt on that, but I want to go ahead and move on a little bit. I'm not backing out of that. That's something we probably could spend a whole hour or more talking about as well. But we were there. You live along the Ohio River, and Topsy and Eliza escaping the slaveholder over the broken ice in the Ohio River to get over to John Parker's place or whatever. I just wanted to see if you had any burrs up your butt about that. But
no, but I concur with you that it does move the needle. All right, where does she write the book? She writes it in New England. She doesn't write it when she's down there in Cincinnati, but she experiences there. Of course, she was her husband involved at Lane Seminary. There's all these debates that are going on at Lane Seminary. Yeah. So she's living a lot of it. But is there a purpose? I would 100% agree. There's a purpose behind that book. Yes.
Yeah. For folks who may be wanting to ask questions, I'm going to ask this next question, and then I'm going to open it up for you all to ask questions. Karen is going to watch as you raise your hand. We'll take the questions in the order that they're offered. If I don't have any questions or anything that goes in after Darryl answers this next question, then I've got some other things that I want to ask him about, and I'll just continue on. I won't sit back at a pregnant pause and say, no questions. If you got one, throw your hand up and we'll let you ask it. Otherwise, I will continue on all the way until we wrap up about 9 o'clock, about 20 minutes from now. So, Darryl, appreciate this. I'm intrigued by your selection of the fighting at Cynthiana and Augusta. And I dare say, as you noted, you have to be a real Civil War buff to know that these actions occurred or anything about that. What brings these engagements to life for you, and why will folks find them really interesting?
Well, for me, what brings them to life, they're very close. I'm a little over an hour from Cynthiana and less than an hour from Augusta. They are small affairs in the grand pantheon of the Civil War, absolutely. But they allow us to talk about tactics. They allow us to talk about personalities, first-person accounts, the burning of towns. Cynthiana, I've already alluded to, is a pro-Southern town, but yet after the Second Battle of Cynthiana, 37 buildings had been burned down. In Augusta, the same thing will happen. 20 buildings will be burnt down there. You have stories of home guards. Some of them are raised in the immediate areas. There are home guard units that come from Cincinnati to fight at the First Battle of Cynthiana, including firemen and policemen. We have stories, again, of the personalities. We get to talk about Morgan and his command. And again, we're seeing it as kind of a microcosm. To me, it's a microcosm of kind of Morgan's overarching Civil War career, right? The highs and the lows. Augusta is just a beautiful little river town too. So the part of the old, I guess it was a Civil War, old historical series called Centennial had been filmed there in Augusta. And so it's just a neat little town as well, right there on the Ohio River. But I think we get to really talk about some individuals and their impacts just on small commands, and just, again, small fighting. You get street fighting in all three of these engagements. You get street fighting, so you're getting a mix of all these little different pieces and parts from all these other larger battles. You're really getting all this kind of mixed and put together here in a little blender in these two little towns.
Well, I'm certainly not opposed to always probing and look at new things, and I was delighted when I saw you propose that. So many people come back and say, well, let's talk about Perryville, or let's go to Mill Springs, or or Camp Wildcat and stuff. And I looked, he says, it's pretty neat, and we've never done that before. So, okay, let's give it a go and see what happens. We've got a question from the audience. John Willen, I think, wants to ask that. John, if we've got you unmuted, go on ahead and ask your question.
Thanks, Lynn. First of all, I'm from Cincinnati originally. My mom's family, my mother's maiden name is Steiner, so that's my Cincinnati.
Oh, good. Okay.
And it's more of a comment because I just came back just an hour ago from Gettysburg. I'm a medical reenactor. We do the 11th Corps Hospital at the George Spangler Farm. And so I wanted to mention a famous Ohioan, since this is the 72nd Ohio, and I was at his grave in the cemetery just yesterday, and that's George Nixon. And that is the great-grandfather of Richard Nixon, who was in the 72nd Ohio. I don't think he was from the Cincinnati area.
No, he was not. The 73rd Ohio is the regiment you're alluding to. They were raised out of Chillicothe. The 72nd is a Western theater.
Yeah,
regiment.
73rd, right.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So and John, good to see you. You and I have talked before.
Yeah. I think when we did the trust in Kentucky, you were involved.
Yes, sir.
Sure we went to the place in Cynthiana.
Yes, we did. Absolutely.
You were very familiar. Yeah. So I enjoyed your presentation, but it brought back memories from the trust conference.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
There were some Cincinnati. I think some guys from Cincinnati must have been at Gettysburg, though, and ended up at
absolutely
Spangler.
Yes, sir. The 5th Ohio. Yes, sir.
Yeah, we do Spangler twice a year, actually, two weekends a year. So.
Yes, sir.
Oh, great. Well, thanks very much, John. We have another question. We have another question for you from Sarah Ferguson. Go ahead and unmute Sarah and let her talk.
Be kind, Sarah.
Oh, of course. Hey, can you hear me? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I've always been curious, Kentucky being a slave state, was their crop mainly tobacco as it became later, or other items? And is tobacco that slave intensive? I've never known.
One of their main staple crops was definitely tobacco prior to and during the Civil War. As a matter of fact, tobacco was still prevalent up until 15, 20, 30 years ago. A lot of those wineries that have started in Kentucky were old tobacco farms. The soil had gotten so bad that they decided to move over to vineyards instead. So it is definitely a still, or it was during the Civil War, a very much one of the cash crops. It is also extremely labor intensive. And so you do have, and again, I want to make sure that everybody understands that the vast majority of Kentuckians were not slave owners, right? Or they were extremely small slave owners. But you did have large, I hate to use the term plantation, I would say large farms, particularly in the bluegrass area, that employed dozens of slaves. So tobacco being a cash crop, and you can grow tobacco in a lot of different places. So small farmers could grow tobacco and pretty much harvest it themselves, or maybe have one or two or 3 slaves on their farmstead. But it is definitely a labor intensive. The process you have to go through, you have to continue to cut, you have to continue to water, you have to continue, and then you got to cut, dry, is almost like a 4 or 5 month process.
Cool. Does that answer your question, Sarah?
Yes, but another kind of related question, was
Go ahead.
Lexington area the horse breeding center like it is now?
Absolutely. It is definitely, it was a heavy bluegrass area. When Morgan comes through in 1864, he will take hundreds of horses from the greater Lexington area. Some of them were under federal control. A lot of them were under private ownership. So it was massively, the bluegrass was then 1860 as it is today in 2021. Absolutely. Great question.
Got it, Sarah?
Yes, thank you.
You betcha. Darryl, you've studied this a good deal. Kentuckians believed, at least some Kentuckians in the Southern armies believed that Bragg's invasion would bring the closet Confederates out to support and bring the state to the Confederation. What is it about Kentucky and its people that those Kentuckians got so wrong?
Well, that's a great question, because I will actually talk specifically about Morgan's telegraph that he will send back to Eben Kirby Smith on July 16th, 1862. And that is that, I call it an infamous assertion, that 25,000 to 30,000 Kentuckians will rise up and join the Confederate forces. 1/10 of that number will actually join the Confederacy, and most of them want to join as cavalrymen, not infantry. And both Smith's and Bragg's army really could use some more infantry in both their forces. One of the things that the Confederacy does extremely well that I think we know about it, but we may not delve into it, is the amount of cavalry forces that they did have in the West, 61, 62, and into 1863, vastly outnumbered the federal efforts in the Western theater. It goes back to what I said before about Kentuckians being satisfied, right? Again, economically, why do I need to go out of state, because I can't stay in Kentucky and join the Confederacy? Because, I mean, Bragg's hope, of course, was to stay in Kentucky and move towards the Ohio River, potentially threatening places like Cincinnati. But after that is no longer an option. There's no reason for whomever on the farm to go join a Confederate unit to have to go back down to Tennessee to fight. I'm fine. I'm economically stable. I have no reason to really join. Now, again, like I said, you got about 2,500 to 3,000 recruits on that campaign. A strong brigade. That's basically what he wound up with. And again, I think it just goes back to the economic situation that's going on at the time. And Kentucky, again, are pro-unionists. You got guys like, I don't know, Clay and Crittenden. I mean, these are all Kentuckians who are all working to preserve the Union in their own way, in their different compromises that they're pitching. So you just have this unionism permeating through most Kentucky civilians, most.
Okay, fair an answer. History tells us, of course, that Bragg is turned back at Perryville. Was the Ohio River a meaningful barrier in the same manner that the Potomac was? And could Confederate armies have operated and been effective in influencing the outcome of the war by invading Ohio or Indiana? And if so, how and where?
That's a great question. I think that the Confederacy would have had a difficult time maintaining any type of force or presence north of the Ohio River because of the amount of gunboats that the Union could put in the Ohio at any one time. It would have made supplying any armies north of the Ohio River, short of foraging, of course, it would have made supplying those armies or those forces very difficult. And I think when you see some of the outpouring of Union responses at various times throughout the war, you're going to get all these convergent forces that are going to, I think they're going to come down hard on any Bragg or Kirby Smith-led army. So I still think, yes, it is a huge barrier. Cincinnati did not even have a bridge during the 1860s. Well, Civil War period. Their first bridge is established, finished construction shortly after the Civil War. That's the Roebling Bridge. During the Civil War, the two pillars on either shore, that's all that had been constructed. So when Cincinnati is responding to the raid, they have to build pontoon boats. Well, I don't think Mr. Bragg and Mr. Smith had a pontoon train with them. It would have been difficult for them to even do something along those lines. So while Morgan can move 2,500 men in 1863 using two boats that he happens to capture on the Kentucky shore to get into Indiana, I don't think you're going to move 30, 40, 50,000 men across the Ohio River. And, you use the term also that Bragg has turned back at Perryville, which is correct, but Perryville campaign is over before that battle even takes place. He can't get Smith to cooperate with him. So there's another problem, right? Even if Bragg decides he wants to go north of the river, Smith might not want to go, or vice versa. So you've got a cooperation issue as well.
Interesting. If you could ask Braxton Bragg a single question, what would you ask him?
Well, I am not a Bragg hater. I guess I'm a Bragg tolerator. And I would have probably asked him, why didn't you hang good old Bishop Polk? Because he seemed to cause so many problems. I think in all seriousness, during the raid or during the Heartland campaign, and there's a lot of people that give Bragg a hard time about the Heartland campaign, but he keeps Chattanooga from falling for another year. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. Buell's army in the summer of 1862 has moved away from Shiloh. They're moving across northern Alabama, and they're on the outskirts of Chattanooga. If Chattanooga falls, it's a major rail hub that leads right into the heart of the South, right into Atlanta. Well, the invasion will cause Chattanooga not to fall until September of 1863. I would love to ask Braxton. I don't know if I want to ask him a question. I would just like to sit and just have just an overall chat with him. Was he as really grouchy as he seemed to be? Did he suffer from migraines? What did he think about some of his subordinates? We always have this feeling too. I'll see this all the time on social media. Everybody hated Braxton Bragg, which is completely not true. There are several first-person accounts, even as late as Chickamauga, about people, I won't say liked him, but they respected him and supported him, including about half of his commanders in the Army of Tennessee. So, I would probably ask you more about the Battle of Buena Vista in 1847, to be honest with you. What was really said, right? What really happened there? So like I said, I'm not a Bragg hater, I'm a Bragg tolerator, I guess.
Well, I think certainly I've spent a lot of time. I started with Tom Conley's series on the Army of Tennessee, and then looked at the manner in which Bragg has been vilified over the years. And then I look at the sources of the vilification, and other than perhaps having a very stern personality that does from time to time border on failure of confidence at key moments. For example, I don't think that in a meeting, in an argument with Nathan Bedford Forrest, that Bragg fares well, and I think Bragg probably fears Forrest. But certainly, it seems to me that Bragg probably suffers from a fact that he's talking to people who are a bit older than he is, and who are a bit more senior than that. And I think that's. I think that Bragg had some splendid opportunities to generate some victories that never came to fruition. And then when he had the opportunity, it seems to me he squandered it. But certainly, I tend to agree with you. I think there's more to Braxton Bragg than history has given him rightfully. And I don't think Grady McWhinney did him any favors when he did a biography on him and ran away from the second volume. So let me we have reached that point. Is gosh, as they always do, the time flies when you're having fun. But something that's really impressed me, and of course, as I did my due diligence, as you started to come into our sphere of visibility and so forth, I want to know more about you and stuff. And what I see consistently on on Facebook is that you're very active on social media and Western theater. And I'd like to give you kind of last word, talk a little bit about what are you doing out on social media and how can people engage with you and what will they get if they like the sites that you're involved in and stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I am very active on social media because I think we need to find every possible way we can to reach that next generation of historians. And Facebook's just one of those ways. I'm involved with the Western Theater and the Civil War Facebook group, as well as website. I've written, I don't know, dozens of blog posts for them on a variety of subjects. And I help admin that with a wonderful young man named Derek Lindow from Kentucky. That was his brainchild. I'm active with the Buffington Island Battlefield Preservation Foundation. I'm one of the board members there. I'm actually serving right now as vice chairman. And so I'm active with their Facebook page. I really enjoy that. I'm also active with a new entity that we're trying to start in Augusta called Civil War Augusta. So we're using social media just to reach different types of audiences, just to make people aware of what happened at Augusta in September of 1862. And of course, I've got my fingers in a few other different projects, but those are the main ones. I do have one more Facebook page. It's called Walking with History. And that's just a spinoff from the tour and talk company that I do on the side. I work full time, as you are well aware, but I do tours and talks as people like me to. Very flexible, like to arrange different things for different people, short as long as they want. You already mentioned Perryville, but yeah, I do a pretty in-depth tour or short tour for people. Perryville, Wildcat, Fort Donelson. We're doing something later with the Western Theater Group. At the end of July, we're doing a Kirby Smith part of the Kentucky campaign. We're going to start in Cumberland Gap. We're going to end with a full day at the Battle of Richmond, Kentucky. Where Derek and I are co-leading that. So just really, I just find that social media is a great way to stay engaged with people and bring new faces into the fold.
That's cool. And how long have you been doing that?
Oh my gosh, I've been on Facebook for probably over 10 years, but involved with the Civil War sites probably, depending on which site, over the last 3 to 5 years.
And do you have a website that people can go to visit if they want to see more about what you're doing on an individual basis and so forth?
Yeah, it's just walkingwithhistory.com, or you can email me at Darryl, DARRYL at walkingwithhistory.com. And like I said, I'm happy to arrange things. I'm super flexible. There's some pricing structure on my website, but I'll be honest with you. If a daughter wants to take their dad for a gift for Father's Day to Perryville, I will make it happen for them. So just really flexible. I do it for fun. As long as my gas and my beer and a meal's covered, I'm pretty happy. So
isn't that the essence of this? I as you say, and the thing I've found over all these years and stuff is that, the Civil War folks and the history people are great people. They spend a lot of time doing wonderful things. And if I didn't do this, I'd have to work for a living. It's just too much fun and too many good people. And I've found another good person in our troop, and I'm delighted to welcome you there. So thank you so much for your help. It's 9:00 and I promised to finish at 9. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your response on short notice. If you know people who missed this and you think they ought to check it out, keep an eye out. Karen will get all this organized, and we'll pop this up on our YouTube channel in probably the next week. And I promise I will get Darryl's registration form for the August program up in the next week to 10 days. I'm 10 days on the road here. So thank you all very much for your help. Karen, thank you for what you did, and have a wonderful night, and we'll catch you in a few weeks. Bye-bye now.
Thanks all.